gentlemen, everyone, welcome to this episode of Calimesa Insider. My name is Will Kolbow. I'm the city manager for the City of Calimesa. Glad to have you on board this month, and I am excited to have our first guest joining us on the podcast a little bit later, our Finance Director Celeste Reid. Since we just approved our budget, our balanced budget, I figured it was a good time to bring our Finance Director on, but looking ahead, looking forward, I know that after our first episode, and thank you for everyone that listened and gave feedback. I very much appreciate that. One thing that was made clear, several people have asked that we talk about public safety and specifically about sheriff's services. So in the next episode, you asked, and I will deliver. We are going to we're going to have a podcast about our sheriff's services. Now, this might actually be an episode that I have to break up into two pieces because I want to keep these podcasts to not more than like 35, 40 minutes. I want to make them a little bit shorter, but sometimes the conversation just kind of gets the best of us and we get into it and we're excited about what we do and want to talk about what we do. So sometimes the episodes are going to go a little bit longer. So I may actually break that one up into two episodes because I do want to talk to leaders on our Riverside County Sheriff's contract, the captain, lieutenant, our POP officer. I want them to all to join us on the podcast. So I'm going to try to get them all to join me, hopefully at the same time, and we can have a nice conversation about our sheriff's services. And then I also will be talking to our new sheriff's ad hoc committee that was just approved at our last city council meeting, which consists of council member John Manley and Mayor Pro Tem Wendy Hewitt. So those are the two people that were appointed by Mayor Bill Davis to our police services ad hoc committee. So we're going to talk to them hopefully also as part of the podcast. So since we're going to do two different interviews, I figure we maybe need to break it up into two episodes. So maybe I'll release the first part of that episode in 1 week in July, and then we'll do the second part of that episode in the following week in July. So that is the plan for the podcast at this time. But before we bring on Celeste to join us on the program, I just want to give you a few quick updates, things that are going on around the city. The Cherry Valley interchange, it's been an ongoing. There's been ongoing projects there, and I say projects, and I'll explain what that means. So people that have driven out there lately have seen that they are putting in traffic signals. Some of the signal masts have gone up. There's still more work to be done. Over the weekend between starting Wednesday, June 14th, and ending Tuesday morning, June 20th, there was a 24/7 closure of the eastbound off-ramp. And what they did was they actually added a lane. So now there is a dedicated right turn lane, and then there's a separate lane to either go straight or turn left. And that is part of putting the signals in. So that was kind of the first leg of the project. There will be other closures coming up. They're not scheduled yet. But as we know those, keep an eye on our social media, both Facebook and Instagram, and you will be able to see updates on those closures as they come. The contractor and the developer who's funding the improvements has been asked to give us at least 10 days notice before there is a closure. So as soon as we get that information, we pass it along to the public. So keep an eye out for that. We have a fun idea for our State of the City. It was mentioned a little bit at our last city council meeting. We're going to do something a little bit different. Usually a State of the City is a sit-down lunch, and we talk about things that happened in the last year in the city and whatnot, but we're going to take a little bit of a different twist on this. We really want the community to come out for this thing, and sometimes it's hard when you have a traditional State of the City to do that. So we're kind of going to do it as a street fair style. So the public will be welcome to come. We're going to have booths for each city department so they can talk about the things that they do and the things that they accomplished in the last year. We'll also have food vendors. We'll have other vendors that are brought in by the Chamber of Commerce. It's all in the planning stages. There's a lot to be planned still, but mark your calendars now. It will be Saturday, October 7th, and it will take place at Mesa View Middle School. So make sure you mark your calendars for that. And finally, at our last city council meeting. The city council approved a contract with the County of Riverside for animal control services. So for the last dozen years or so, our animal control services have been provided by the city of Beaumont, and they informed us in August of last year that they will no longer be able to provide services, and our current contract with them terminates at the end of this month, June 30th. So we went out and looked at a bunch of options, and the best option for us from a cost benefit perspective and the ability to provide services and shelter space was with the County of Riverside. Now, I will tell you, just in full disclosure, when that contract goes into place, our shelter that will be designated for the City of Calimesa will be in Thousand Palms, but that's only temporary because the county has included in their fiscal year 24 budget that they will be opening the San Jacinto animal shelter. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. They've got to put in several $1 million to get it ready to open again. But once it is open, that will be the designated shelter for the City of Calimesa, much closer and hopefully more convenient for our public. The contract is for 2 years, and so we'll see how things go. We'll evaluate it, over the next 2 years to see if we're getting good value and we're getting good services for our residents. And if for whatever reason we're not, that's something we can always explore in the future. But we are excited, and we are very optimistic about our relationship with the county coming up starting July 1. Okay, let's get to the main event now. I talked last time on the premiere episode of the podcast about what I do for the city, which is a little bit of everything. But the reality is that we cannot do anything without the work of our staff, and our staff is second to none. In the last 6 months, I've gotten to know everyone and what they do, and I continue to be impressed every day by everything that our staff is able to accomplish. Now, we accomplish our goals through a combination of people that actually work for the city and contract employees that work for various firms that we contract with. And so we get it all, it's a group effort and we get everything done together. And so I am very excited to bring on our very first guest onto the podcast, our Finance Director, Celeste Reid. So Celeste, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be your first guest.
So why don't we start with just a little bit about yourself. So tell us about yourself, professional background, maybe a little personal details that you'd like to share. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about Celeste Reid.
Well, thank you for asking. So I've been in my profession now. I'm a CPA and in the finance world for over 25 years. Like yourself, I started off as an auditor and spent most of my career heretofore with about 14 years in public accounting and completing audits and managing taxes. And I spent a year working for the BNP Paribas Open. I worked for 5 years for McCallum Theater, which is a nonprofit organization. It was a performing arts center. And I have now spent 5 years working for city government and agency. I spent a couple of years with Palm Springs, and now I'm here with the City of Calimesa. Fun facts about me: I actually grew up in the City of Calimesa. I'm really proud that I grew up here. I attended Calimesa Elementary. I went to YIS, Yucaipa Intermediate School, and I graduated from Yucaipa High School. So it is very full circle for me to come back. My mom still lives here in the area in Calimesa, and it's just really nice, and I'm a pleasure to be part of this wonderful staff. And I agree with you, we have a wonderful team here. And a couple of other fun items to mention about myself and my family is I've been married for over 22 years to my husband, Tom, and he spent his career in law enforcement and recently retired. We have 2 children, and my daughter is going into her junior year at UC Santa Cruz, and my son is going to be a senior in high school. And I really enjoy spending my time. I go to movies and I attend many concerts, and I love music. I saw over 96 performances last year that we counted. So that's how I spend a lot of my time.
Well, and I think that one thing that I've been told throughout my career, I'm a CPA, or my license is active now, but I've always been told you don't seem like the typical accountant, and I would probably put that label on you as well, because you're very fun, you're very outgoing. A lot of accountants are very introverted, and admittedly, I am an introvert, believe it or not, but I know that you are an extrovert. And so I really enjoy that about you.
Thank you very much. I am definitely an extrovert. I love spending time with people. I'll spend time with thousands of people at concerts. The bigger, the better. So yeah, thank you for seeing and acknowledging that. And I love my profession. I've loved being a CPA. I'm very proud of the work I put into it, and I'm just so happy to be here at Calimesa, being a finance director for this fine city that I grew up in.
Great. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the day-to-day that you do here at the city. We only have a team of two. It's a mighty team of two. And so we do get things done by committee. A lot of people wear a lot of different hats. So I know that even though we have two full-time finance staff members, other people in other departments also do some tasks for finance as well. So just tell me about the day-to-day operations and what may be of interest for our residents, what the finance department does.
Certainly. So we are responsible for all of the payroll at the city and ensuring that the city staff is paid. We manage all of the accounts payable, so ensuring all of our vendors get paid. Every check that's written is managed through the finance department. We're responsible for coding and doing all the data entry for that. We have to track and record all of the receipts and cash receipts that come in. We're responsible for several layers of compliance because we're a governmental agency, so we have to manage all of the audit processes. There's many layers of reporting that we have to do, of supplementary reports that goes to the county agencies, state agencies. We manage grant reporting here. We do a lot of the invoicing and tracking and monitoring. And then probably what the public really is interested in and spends a lot of time focused on is our budget and how we spend our dollars. And that process is managed beginning to end, beginning with this finance department and it ends with the finance department. But there are many layers and many team members that are involved in the budget process. So I'll be happy to expand on that if you'd like.
Yeah. Let's actually talk about that, because that is one of the most important things that we do as a city, not just in the finance department, but as a city as a whole, is adopt our budget, right? Because obviously people aren't going to come to work. People love working here, but they still, part of the reason they come here is for the paycheck, right? And also the services that are provided to us. So, and that all flows through the budget process. So why don't we talk about that a little bit more and what is involved and kind of pull the curtain back a little bit into that process, because I think people get exposed to it with our budget workshop and then ultimately the budget adoption. And that's, the budget workshop is usually the first time they're seeing the budget for the following year. But there's a lot of work that goes into that. So tell us a little bit about what goes into building that in our budget.
Absolutely. So it's a process that really spans over several months of the year. There's constant monitoring and tracking throughout the year of the budget that has previously been implemented. And working in the finance department, when you're working with budgets, you're always looking ahead. So you're looking in the current year, but then you're also looking ahead. So we begin the budget process in February, typically, of every year, for it to come to its full conclusion in June. So it starts off with distribution and dissemination of data, right? As we distribute budget to actuals, where prior years have been, and so forth, some data analytics. So our department heads can start to build ideas and focuses and direction of where they want and need the budget to go for the next fiscal year. And through that, there's a series of several meetings. There's a lot of dialogue, there's investments, there's taking a deeper look into analytics, and it ultimately rolls up, and all of the data that with the input that we receive from our department heads through all of our meetings, we ultimately come together, and you and I work very closely together then to pull the budget together in its entirety. And then there's a weighted process of looking in the city as a whole, because department heads, their responsibility is their department. But if you, of course, you're responsible for presenting a budget to the council that meets their vision, that meets their needs, their policy direction. So there's a series of decision-making process that goes into the budget document that gets submitted. And then we have series of several meetings with the council. We have a finance committee meeting. That is a meeting that's held over several hours. We have the budget workshop, which is another hours long meeting where we're really with the full council and everybody's unpacking all of the decisions that have been made and so forth, with the ultimate presentation to the council for adoption in June. So it's a several months long process. Is there something else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah.
Some of our steps.
I think that the analysis that goes into it, obviously we do take, we have to incorporate the vision, and there's a strategic plan that the council's adopted, and we try to put a lot of our effort especially into new spending, into what is within that strategic plan. And the other thing is obviously we hear a lot of feedback from the community, and we want to also incorporate what their asks are. And that's a big challenge for us, right? Because, one of the things that we do as part of that, we're talking a lot about the expenditure side, but we can only spend what we bring in. And I think maybe there is a little bit of a misperception about taxation in this state, because we pay a lot of taxes, right? We pay our property taxes, we pay sales tax when we make purchases at the store, or when we buy a car or something like that, or online purchases. You pay sales tax on any goods, a lot of goods that you buy, not necessarily all of them. You pay income taxes, which we don't see. We don't see any of that. That is purely a state revenue, and it all goes to the state. Now, we may see some of that in the form of grants and things like that we get from the state. Gas tax is another one that people pay, but a lot of these things get divvied up. So whether it's gas tax gets divvied up, your sales tax that gets divvied up, your property tax gets divvied up. There's no one revenue source. I think the only revenue source that comes 100% to the city is our business license, right? And that's only about 25,000 or maybe even less than that a year. Another one is TOT, which we only get, a very small amount per year. So a lot of the revenue, a lot of the taxes you pay that the city gets, we only get a fraction of that. We get a part of that. And so we don't have a lot of control. One of the ways we can control it is through economic development and trying to attract businesses to the city. There's a lot of competition for that. A lot of it has to do with the demographics and the population patterns that we have. Being in a rural area, having I'm just looking at a map behind you, Celeste, that I see a lot of open space, right? And that's something that we're very proud of. But unfortunately, open space doesn't produce revenue. And so we are limited to kind of what our demographics are, what our population patterns are in terms of attracting big box and things like that. So that's a big challenge, because when you're looking at, when you look at a Trader Joe's, for example, right, that's a lot of something that people want. Well, they have a certain demographic that they want to meet, and they have a certain population. They look at the 10-mile radius, a 15-mile radius, about where are the shoppers going to come from. And if they look at us compared to a city that has more population around them, if their 10-mile radius population is 300,000 and maybe ours is only about 100,000, 150,000, well, they're going to go more towards the 300,000, right? So those are some of the challenges we have. And so where we have control over revenue is very limited. So what we have to spend then on services is limited to what revenue we have coming in, and short of doing the, what I think is something that is a last resort is like tax increases, like sales taxes, things like that some cities look at. By the way, City of Calimesa is not exploring that. We have no plans to do that whatsoever.
Nope.
And so, because and quite frankly, part of it's because we do have a balanced budget, and that's something that we're really, really proud of. In the last few years, we've really seen our revenue increase due to development, right? So all these homes, whether it's JP Ranch, Singleton Heights, Summerwind, with those homes, we have seen an increase in the amount of property tax revenue that have come into the city. We also have seen some sales tax increases because of the marketplace at Calimesa. So those are the kinds of things that have developed into revenue sources for the city that has allowed us to expand on our services and things like that. So I think that's part of it. And then the council, when they have to make a decision on the budget, that's another big aspect to it. It's a difficult, that's one of the most important and difficult decisions for them to make, because they hear from the community. They want to, meet the community's needs, but there are a lot of things that they have coming at them, whether it's, we've heard a lot about, wanting more sheriff services and things like that. And that is certainly one of the most important things we do is public safety. But we also have people that want more parks. They want more trails, and those all have costs associated with them. And we can't just say, well, we want these things, so we need to increase our revenue to meet those demands. Sometimes it is about prioritization. And so, those are decisions that the council does not take lightly, and that they have to weigh and ultimately make a decision on how we want to mix that up. Now, as staff, we obviously kind of have, we kind of know what's happening on the ground level, and we make recommendations, but we also get a lot of feedback from council and from the finance committee, which consists of Mayor Davis and council member Jeff Cervantes. And there's a lot of back and forth and input that they have into that process as well, that shapes what our budget looks like. So I think that's probably the other aspect of it, is on the tail end. There is a lot of back and forth and feedback that we, even though we're formally going through the budget process several months out of the year, it's something that we are keeping an eye on constantly, and always, we always have our ears open for things that are, talked about as priorities from whether it's council or from the community, and how can then we integrate that into our budget process and into our capital process too. Because one of the things we didn't talk about is our capital budget, our CIP, our 5-year CIP, which is north of $90 million. Now that is a lot of money that's going to be spent in the future. And those are related mostly to transportation and our interchanges. So Cherry Valley is one that we're getting close to completing, or talked about earlier on the program. And then we have 4 interchanges that are all in various stages of development to improve those interchanges, because they haven't been touched since the freeway was built. So we also have to, not just look at the year we're in, but we have to do a lot of, financial planning for the future, and that goes into the budget as well. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that, again, that's where the budget it's a financial document, but it's more so a policy document, right?
Absolutely.
Because the budget has to be reflective. We can't implement a lot of the policies we want to do without funding them. So that's why the budget I see is more of a policy document than anything else.
That's actually very nicely stated, and I completely agree with you. The budget process is lengthy, but it's really important, and we just need to put a lot of value, time, and effort into it, because it governs our decision-making processes. It governs how the funds are spent. And as we talked about in concept, and as you were talking about, the needs of a community, more oftentimes than not, outpace the resources available to service those needs. And this isn't exclusive to Calimesa. This is government agencies from federal on down to special districts. So this is a very common theme. And I would just like to share that I'm actually very, very proud of Calimesa and the disciplined process with which decision making has been made and financial decisions. We've seen historical run, and even when I was preparing, it's been years now, but when I was preparing for this, for the interview, and I was reviewing the financials, and after I accepted the position and I was talking with people, I said, you wouldn't believe their financials, like that there's hardly any debt. It's amazing. And they have this incredible reserve policy. So it was in part what attracted me to Calimesa, because I could see the overlay of fiscal responsibility that had been managed, and that thoughtful decision-making process has been made for years, and in a trend of that. It wasn't just, we had one good year. It's been a historic trend. So I'm very proud of that.
Right. And we've been continually being able to, and a lot of that, I think can be attributed to, the combination of the city council and making, informed, prudent decisions, combined with our previous city manager, Bonnie
Absolutely.
Johnson. And
she's amazing.
She came with a wealth of knowledge coming into this job. and really put that to work, I think, for the city of Calimesa and for its residents. And I don't think that can be underscored enough of how she has set us up for long-term success, working with the city councils of today and of the past as well. And one of the things that is also as a byproduct of that has been our healthy reserves and the reserve policy you talked about. And really quickly, let's talk about that, because I think that people see this pot of money and go, wait a minute, we have this pot of money sitting here. Why can't we spend it on these things? And we've seen, in cities even close to us where that can get you into trouble, right? And part of that is there's a cash flow issue, I think, first and foremost, that I think people need to understand. A lot of our costs are very consistent throughout the year, right? Payroll, we make payroll every 2 weeks. We have to, make payments to contractors for construction projects, but our revenue doesn't necessarily come in like that. So our biggest source of revenue, for example, is property taxes, right? Mm-hmm. And we get a big chunk of that in December, and then again in January, and again in May. Because if you think about, if you look at your property tax bill, the due dates are December 10th and April 10th. So we don't get that money until those property tax payments are made to the county. So we get a big chunk of revenue in December or in January, another one in May, but we need to have cash flow and cash on hand to get us through those first few months of the year prior to us getting those chunks of money, because we do have bills to pay. So part of the reason you want to have those reserves on hand is so that you can continue to have operations before those big revenue payments come in, right? So that is one aspect of reserves.
Absolutely.
And then also for unknowns and contingencies, and being able to sustain those. And, in other cities I've worked with and working with labor unions, they look at that and go, well, you don't need to have FEMA will come through with a check. Oh. Well, how long does it take FEMA to come with a check?
They're averaging 5 years right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an average.
And
of 5
18
years.
months
after a respective emergency event, it can take 5 years to get reimbursement.
Fun fact, as of, I don't know if this is the case now, but as of a couple of years ago, just maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, going back to maybe 2018, 2019, there were still FEMA payments being made for the 1994 Northridge earthquake.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, counting on FEMA and the federal government to come through when we have emergencies happening is not a very good business model, I would say.
No, and I would agree with you. And when I talk about reserves in context, it's this it's a delicate balance, right? Because as you mentioned, it's not prudent just to hoard money away and only have reserves. But the balance comes in is you do have to have the balance for potential emergencies. So for context, with the City of Calimesa, we have a 35% reserve policy, which on the face seems high. Some cities will go for 15%, 20%, 22%, 30% is high. But if we look at it from a statistical ratio of our general fund operating fund budget, which averages about, any 8 to 10 million, that's really, if you had a strict reserve policy, that'd only be 3.5 million. And it's been referenced, our previous city manager would reference this, and I'm in a complete agreement with her. We could have neighboring communities who have a lower percentage of reserve policy, but it costs us just the exact same amount of dollars to replace a hole in a street as it does anybody else. So the city of Calimesa, because of our ratio and proportional numbers, we have to have a higher level and percentage of reserves. Right. And reserves are what I sometimes say, they're precious dollars, right? They're funds that come in. We want the taxpayer dollars to work for the taxpayers, but it's also the responsibility of the city council and staff to manage those reserves, to make sure there is something there for in the event of an emergency. And we've also spent great time and care of not relying on our reserves to pay for ongoing expenditures. We've spent a lot of time and energy differentiating between ongoing revenues and one-time revenues and matching those expenditures. It's very, very important that process is managed and very given great care and oversight. So it's not to say that it could never, ever happen that you wouldn't use reserves, but a city would need to be prudent and very, very careful heading down that path. Because if a city starts to rely on reserves to start paying for staff salaries, business maintenance, operating costs, and so forth, that's a path that's probably not going to end up very well for future for future leaders of the community.
That's right.
Yeah. And we're very, as appreciative as we are with the wonderful foundation that has been established for this era of the city of Calimesa, we're also very conscientious and aware that we want to leave the city and, in the current state, if not even better state, 5-10 years from now. It's always with the prospect of leveling up and just making sure we maintain absolute financial prudence and decision making.
Right. Now that's a great point. And that is something that we have done a very good job with. And, I think people will look at, other cities around us, whether it's Yucaipa, Banning, Beaumont, and everybody's budget's different, right? Because they're different sized cities. They provide different services. I think you look at the profile of each of the 4 past cities, and each of them are different. They all have their unique aspects. And, like Banning, for example, has their own electric utility. Mm-hmm. And that's a very unique thing. There's not a lot of cities. I think there's only one. They're only one of about maybe a dozen cities or so in Southern California that actually has their own electric utility. And so there are pros and cons that go with each of those things. And, we're also the newest city in the past, right? Yucaipa is a year older than us, but Beaumont and Banning are, over 100 years old each. They were incorporated in the 19 teens. And so it does change how you budget and how your revenue sources come in. So it is, trying to compare 2 cities and how they do things and how they budget is very difficult to do because each city has its own unique profile. Maybe the processes can be similar, but the output's going to be very different depending on the profile of the city.
Absolutely. And I would also just like to add with respect to our neighbors that we do see ourselves as a geographic region. So obviously Calimesa and each respective city, they have to be their own best advocates. But when other cities do well, it complements our residents and our entire community. So we want to see our cities do well. We want to see our cities be filled with financial prudence and its opportunities and their shared resources and shared opportunities and shared entertainment and restaurants and so forth. There's always a little bit of fun, with respect to, high schools and, fun, competing teams and footballs and that's
stuff. Yeah,
that's what makes communities fun. But we're very much in hope and in support of all of our neighboring cities where we want our friends and family and neighbors all live there. So we want to see everybody doing well and making good financial decisions. So I believe in the Pass area, and this place is growing and it's amazing.
Yes.
A lot of wonderful people live here.
So let's talk really quickly. We have a couple of minutes left here. Let's just talk quickly about the audit. So that's the other side of it. So we've talked about looking forward, and then when you do the audit, you're actually looking back, right?
That's true.
At the what actually happened. And so just really quickly, we just had our interim audit here recently. I think it was last week that our auditors were here for their first look at our new auditors. They do what's called interim work, and that's just some preliminary work where they test our internal controls and things like that, and then they'll be back out here later in the year to look at once the books are closed to make sure everything is in proper order. So just talk about what that process looks like for the layperson.
So the annual audit, it's a measurement to review the state of our financials to make sure that the financials are effectively free of material misstatements. So the term material misstatements means like a heavily weighted ratio for a dollar value or a percentage calculation. And the auditors are responsible for coming in and they do test of transactions. They run samples. Auditors are not responsible for looking at 100% of every single check that has been issued or every single deposit that's been made, but they run a test of our balance sheet transactions and our coding. They look to our budget. They analyze our internal controls. And they just prepare the financial statements to ensure that we are properly stated, and it's an independent set of eyes. So auditors have to maintain their independence, and there's great care and regulations and standards and so forth. So They come in, they'll spend about probably 2 to 3 weeks on the entire process. So reviewing our books and so forth. Is there something else that you think we can add to that process?
I mean, the only thing I would add is that when what's produced is our financial statements, and it looks a little bit different than what our budget looks like.
It
right?
does.
So,
it's a different form of reporting.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's under what it's called generally accepted accounting principles, and we are governed by the Government Accounting Standards Board. So private companies are governed by the Financial Accounting Standards Board, which is called FASB, and we are governed by GASB. Now, GASB will try to the extent possible, try to follow private sector standards, but there are a lot of key differences in how we operate, because obviously there's a profit motive on the private side when we're not talking about nonprofits, obviously. But there is a kind of a government, financial resources, and kind of what we are trying to do is we have a lot of we do service provisions, right? So we are there is a different aspect and a different goal for what we do as a government agency versus what a private entity would do, and so the accounting for that does look a little bit different as a result, and so. But it can get confusing for people to look at the financial statements and try to compare that to what's in the budget, because of the rules of GASB and how you have to record certain transactions. And it seems like every year there's more pronouncements coming out that maybe even muddy the waters even more. It feels like
arguably, yes.
It's supposed to. It's theoretically supposed to make financial statements more comparable. So you can take two governments, put them next to each other, and make them more comparable. But I think in the process of doing that, it actually makes things more confusing in terms of how you have to account for things like leases and softwares that we have. You can get into the weeds like crazy on these things, but the bottom line is that the audit does do a lot to make sure that what we're recording in our books is reflective of actually what's happening in the city. And I think that's the biggest component in terms of our audit, to make sure that those numbers are reflective of our actual financial activity. Absolutely. And so that is the main goal of it. So
yes, thank you for that.
Yeah. So thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I really appreciate the time. We went over a half hour here. So, but
we talked about how I'm an extrovert. I do like to talk.
That's right. And so, but I think it's a good information, and I'm really happy that you are my first guest on the program.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
And that will do it for us this month on the podcast. Thank you for joining us. Next month, as I had mentioned at the top of the program, we will be talking about our sheriff services with members of the Riverside County Sheriff's team. Hopefully they'll be able to join us and talk about the services they provide and some crime statistics in Calimesa, some of the challenges that we have here. And also, maybe there are things that, some crime tips and things like that they can share with our residents that would help them in their day-to-day lives. Our city council meets every first and third Monday of the month. Please visit our website at cityofcalimesa.net to find links to all of our social media pages that has news, updates, and information. Like I had talked about at the beginning of the program, the Cherry Valley Blvd closures that are upcoming, those will be posted, as well as other updates as they come. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast catcher, which we're on about a dozen different platforms. Just visit our website, cityofcalimesa.net. On the homepage, you can scroll to the bottom. You'll see a link for the City Manager's podcast, and you can find links to any number of podcast catchers that you want to subscribe to. Until next time, please stay safe. Have a great 4th of July, and I will talk to you again next month.